I'm sunburnt. Mama Fergie. Mama Fergie. Come on. What a name. Yuli Garza. The Gars. Mobile preview. Oh, look at that. That's neat. That's neat. Interesting. Gamerman. Classic. We're going to wait a minute. We've got Genesis 13 and 14 this evening. After doing Adam and Eve, which was super interesting. Very interesting. Now back to Genesis. Pastora, hello. Hello, the lovely Pastora. Ghost will not be with us this evening. He is on a yacht in Miami. Or something like that. I don't know. Something to that effect. Hello. All right. Hugo, George, Beth, American Made what? It cuts off. Crystal. All right. Everybody on TikTok, I'd recommend you go to YouTube. The quality is better. You can also see the scripture in full. And the people on YouTube are just lovely. So I highly recommend that. But either way, we're doing Genesis 13 and 14. If you haven't been with us, we do Sunday night every week at 6 p.m. Central Time. And we do Thursday night every week at 7 p.m. Central Time. There's a link to the Discord on my profile in TikTok. There's a link to the Discord in the live chat pinned or in the description of the video. The group is free, whatever, but you'll be able to tell when we're doing stuff. You'll get like a live alert when we do these, but we do them twice a week right now. One Old Testament, one New normally, but right now during the New Testament slot, we are doing the Forgotten Letters of Eden. So we're doing non-canonical text, the conflict of Adam and Eve and Satan, whatever you want to call it. It's a portion of the origin story that early Christianity decided was not inspired by God. So they removed it from the Bible, the canon, because it's a collection of a bunch of texts. At one point in history, there were a lot more than what we have today. For anybody who didn't know that, over the years, these groups of men got together and they decided this is not canonical anymore because we're removing it from the canon because we do not believe it to be inspired by God. One of those texts is what I'm talking about, Adam and Eve, the conflict of Adam and Eve. It picks up where Genesis leaves off. We thought that would be fitting because right now we're doing Genesis on Sundays. So on Thursdays, we just started, Thursday at 7 p.m. Central Time, we are doing the Forgotten Letters of Adam and Eve from start to finish. I guarantee most people have not read it. It's super interesting. Whether you think it's inspired by God or not doesn't really matter. It adds context to the time. It adds context to Genesis. You know, take it or leave it context, but context is all the same. So, joined from your short videos, Dana. All right, so we're in Genesis 13 and 14. TikTok again. I recommend you go to YouTube. It's a better user experience, they might say. You guys are so lovely. All right, so 13. So Abram, because we are pre-Abraham, right? Abram and Sarai, so pre-Sarah. So Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him. Lot is Abraham's nephew. We know a lot about Lot because of the story that we're about to read. This is kind of Lot's shining moment right here. Now, Abram was very rich. He was a trader. This is how he was rich. So he traded in livestock primarily, from what we understand, but it's likely that he traded in other things as well. The reason we know livestock for sure is because of what we're about to read. So Abram was rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold, all due to his international trading is what he did. And he journeyed on from Negeb as far as Bethel to the place where his tent had been at the beginning, between Bethel and Ai, to the place where he had made an altar at the first. And there Abram called upon the name of the Lord, and Lot, who went with Abram, also had flocks and herds and tents, so that the land could not support both of them. This is somewhat confusing because it sounds in such a way that it is not. The land could not support both of them dwelling together, for their possessions were so great that they could not dwell together. And there was strife between the herdsmen of Abram's livestock and the herdsmen of Lot's livestock. That right there. So there is no issue between Lot and Abram. There is some contention between the staff, the herding staff of each man, so of Lot and Abram. So because the land was such a small area, they literally could not fit there, is what it's saying. It's not necessarily because of the contention between the two groups. Lot and Abram have no issue, but their staff essentially do, kind of. But even that, it's not the reason that the land cannot accommodate them. We're talking literal geographic issues. Because of how much livestock each of the men had, where they were specifically in the same place would not work. The strife is just kind of an added contention point that you need to be aware of. At that time, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, one of those you don't hear from a lot, the other you hear constantly. They were dwelling in the same land. One thing we've talked about it already, but if you haven't been with us, because there's a bunch on TikTok right now, the Canaanites, I feel like most Christians think this is a specific group of people. It's not. It's used very generically to identify a number of groups of people during this time period. This is like one of those weird things that I just feel like everybody never asked the question, and then no pastor's ever told you the answer because it's not clear. So if they were to tell you it was a specific group of people at the time of this writing, they'd be lying. There's nothing to support that whatsoever. What there is a lot of evidence to support that this is a generic way of referring to a lot of different types of people, a lot of different groups or tribes or whatever you want to call them. The Perizzites is different. We don't get a lot from them, right? There's not a lot of references from it, but part of the Hebrew word refers to people who are in an actual village versus a city. The Canaanites are often talked about in terms of cities, larger living quarters. For today, we'd probably label it a city. Whereas the other group was primarily villages without walls, is kind of like the distinguishment of the Hebrew meaning. And so the Canaanites imagine big cities for the time, obviously, big cities with walls, protection, defenses, yada, yada. The other group, not so much. This is more in reference to these unwalled, undefended cities that would really be more like villages if you were to compare them. Them also could refer to a number of different groups of people. It's not a specific, we know exactly who these people were. So either with the Perizzites or the Canaanites, large groups used to identify a number of different groups of people. It's not specific. One being more of city with defenses is kind of what you want to have in your mind. The other being more unwalled villages that don't have things quite as good as the Canaanites would. Then Abraham said to Lot, that there be no strife between you and me, and between your herdsmen and my herdsmen, for we are kinsmen. Abraham is choosing, and he's about to do it more, he's choosing to give Lot kind of the upper hand, is what he's about to do. So he's prefacing this by saying, like, there's no issue between you and I. Let's make sure there's no issue between our herdsmen, because we are kinsmen. Then he says, is not the whole land before you? Separate yourself from me. If you take the left hand, then I will go to the right. Or if you take the right hand, then I will go to the left. That's important because it's a huge gesture on Abram's part. At the time, hierarchy was a huge thing, much more than it is today. Like the actual order of lineage mattered. So if you were the older man, if you were the person in a position of authority, it would be unlike that. It would be unlike you in that position to then look to Lot and say, you pick. If you go left, I'll go right. If you go right, I'll go left. Normally, Abram would choose because he was the authority. So this is kind of a gesture that Abram is showing him right now. And Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord, like the land of Egypt, in the direction of Zoar. So Lot chooses the best land that is visible or available to them. Abram gave him the choice, and Lot chose the land that was the best. This was before the Lord destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah. That is important because we're about to read into Sodom and Gomorrah. Lot chose for himself all the Jordan Valley, and Lot journeyed east. Thus they separated from each other. Abram settled in the land of Canaan. This would be the eastern shore of the Mediterranean Sea. This is in the area we talked about a couple weeks ago of like Lebanon and Syria. That's where Abram is going. While Lot settled along among the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom. Sodom is not a place that we are aware of. Just for clarity of history, biblical scholars have no idea where this is, or if this actually is somewhere, or if the city that it actually took place in was renamed this due to trying to add meaning, like the author. It happens in tons of other areas of the Bible where they're trying to add or clarify on meaning of something, and in doing so they change facts or details in order to make the story better or to try to teach a lesson better. But biblical scholarship, the meaning of the word is unknown, and the geographical location is unknown. Gomorrah, also Sodom and Gomorrah, is also not a place that we're aware of, and the meaning is very unclear. That's generous of Abram to let Lot choose the land. Right. It was a big gesture because of the way hierarchy worked. It's a big gesture. It's actually a pretty big deal. All right, so Abram settled in the land of Canaan, while Lot settles towards the cities of the valley and moved his tent as far as Sodom, which is a place we have no idea where it actually is, or if it was somewhere actually. Now, the men of Sodom were wicked, great sinners against the Lord. This is the preface of Sodom and Gomorrah. So that is the line that indicates we're now moving into a section where we are going to learn what Sodom and Gomorrah was, at least in an illustrative sense, if not in a historical sense. The Lord said to Abram after Lot had separated from him, "Lift up your eyes and look from the place where you are, northward and southward and eastward and westward. For all the land that you see, I will give you, to you and your offspring forever. I will make your offspring as the dust of the earth, and that if one can count the dust of the earth, your offspring also can be counted," saying there will be many of them, is what that's saying, that you will have many offspring. "Arise, walk through the length and the breadth of the land, for I will give it to you." So Abram moved his tent and came and settled by the oaks of Mamre, which are at Hebron. And there he built an altar to the Lord. Now, this location, we actually do know a little bit about, unlike Sodom and Gomorrah. This is where Yahweh appeared to Abram earlier in chapter 12. So when God came to Abram earlier in 12, it was at this same location. So we have a little bit of correspondence in geography there. Now, this beginning section of 14, I want to clarify something. I'm going to throw Discord on the screen for a second. TikTok, you're not going to be able to see that, so go to YouTube if you care. Otherwise, just hang out for 2 seconds. So in the Bible study section on Discord, where we had a bunch of things we saved for going back later, so the Genesis discussion forum, every week we've kind of decided, like, hey, these are some things we want to go over again when we're done with Genesis. I added, remember, it was Genesis 10 that was full of genealogy, and I didn't want to do it here. We'll do it at the end, and we'll just go through all of the people, who they were, what we know about them, if we know anything about them. This is going to be the same game. So in 14, from the beginning through verse 10, is just names, and that's really it. I have everything on all the names, but I don't want to spend this time doing that. So I saved 14 in our section on Discord there. So when we come back to do all the genealogies and some of the kind of dry work, is what I would call it, we'll do it all at once. So if people don't want to come, they don't have to come, and we still can carry on with Bible study. The only thing I do want to point out is this section that I highlighted. So they defeated, one of these groups defeated all the country of the Amalekites. This is one almost everybody's probably heard of because it pops up throughout your biblical study. This is a nomadic group of people, or at least somewhat nomadic, that later ends up in Canaan. That's why they become important to us later. Genesis makes it seem like they are in writing. I mean, it makes it seem like these are descendants in some way of Esau, which is in the lineage of Abraham. So Abraham's grandson would be Esau. And the belief is that the Amalekites are descendants of Esau, therefore of Abraham. That becomes important later, but that's the only one I really wanted to point out just to save time. So all of this is just naming different groups and different people, a little bit of not even context on them. It's really just a list. So you don't miss anything there, but we will come back and we'll pick it apart at the end of Genesis. So picking up where the actual story begins is in chapter 10. Yeah, in chapter 10. So now the valley of Siddim was full of bitumen pits. We talked about this previously in Genesis 2. Really all it is tar. They're tar pits. So it's referring to these pits in the ground that are, it's petroleum essentially. It's hydrogen and carbon. It's a literal tar pit, natural tar pit that historians have seen and believe, at least for the most part, from what I've seen, that it would make sense geographically where they were. So that's what the reference is there. And as the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, some fell into them, and the rest fled to the hill country. So the enemy took all the possessions of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their provisions and went their way. They also took Lot. This is where Abram gets pulled in to the story, because until now, Abram's not a part of this. Lot moved to that area. Lot was in the city near Sodom and Gomorrah, in Sodom and Gomorrah. Abram wasn't. But the minute they take Lot, who is the son of Abram's brother, who was dwelling in Sodom, they took him, they took his possessions, and then they also went their way. This is where Abram gets pulled in. So 13 says, then one who had escaped came and told Abram the Hebrew, who was living by the oaks of Mamre, an Amorite, brother of Ishau and Aner. They were allies of Abraham. Now in 13, this is interesting. So I'm going to read you something. Abram the Hebrew, the way that's written, the literal usage, the Hebrew language word here could come from the Hebrew language preposition, which is ever, meaning beyond, resulting in the translation, Abram, the one from beyond, which would be beyond the river. However, it says, this phrase most likely refers to Abram being a descendant of Aber, which we know from chapter 10 and 11, whom Genesis seems to present as the forefather of the Hebrew people. The reason it stands out is because this isn't common. He's not introduced or titled this way. It's specific to the context, which makes it at least somewhat important to the context. Scott, good to see you, man. That was out of the Logos Study Bible, that little excerpt I just read. I think it's one of those interesting things that, like, you just be aware of it. It doesn't really change anything, but it's an interesting note before you just burn right through it. So who was living by the oaks of Mamre and Amorite? We read that. These were allies of Abram. They would be people who were allies possibly by an actual contract because of the way that is written. It's not written anywhere else. It's again very specific to this context. So it could be they were allies of Abram because they actually had a contract geographically with each other. Otherwise, it's hard to explain because the way this is written in Hebrew is not written anywhere else. It's not used anywhere else in the Old Testament. So we have nothing to check it off of. It's one of those weird ones. When Abram heard that his kinsmen, who he referred Lot as earlier, had been taken captive, he led forth his trained men, born in his house, 318 of them. There's a lot of arguing about this 318. Due to other texts, other ancient texts, who use a similar or the same number. A lot of scholarship believes it's not the literal number. It was used as it. It's one of the ones where they use it to add something to the story. That it doesn't need to be specifically 318 soldiers that they're talking about. It could have a different meaning behind it. Meaning to the author, the actual numbers were irrelevant. They didn't matter. What mattered more is that he wanted to get this across. So in one of these old Egyptian texts, there is a princess arrives with 318 harem attendants. There's also an old Greek text where 318 men die in a 4-day battle. The number 318 is the sum of 12 prime numbers from 7 to 47, so the number may have a symbolic meaning. The reason people think that, again, is because if you get out of the Bible and you compare to other works of literature from the same time period, you find these parallels, oftentimes with specific events and things, but also with numbers, which is why I personally am kind of skeptical about numerology from the Bible alone, because so many other religions and old historical documents have very similar things with entirely different meanings. So it's sketchy, it's shady, but this number of 317, 318 is used common across literature of the time. So it's possible that it was 318 literal men. It's also possible that it wasn't, and it's more of trying to express a different meaning. So born in the same house, 318 of them, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. And he divided his forces against them by night, he and his servants, and defeated them, and pursued them to Hobah, north of Damascus. Then he brought back all the possessions, and also brought back his kinsman, Lot, with his possessions, and the woman and all the people. So he went out, and he won. He battled, he got Lot back, he got all of the possessions back from Sodom and Gomorrah, and he also got this woman that seems to be with Lot. Wonder who she is. And he rescues them. He brings them back. So Abram blessed by... Oh, this gets into something good. Here, let me pull this up real quick. All right, beautiful. So let me read this real quick too. This is a breakdown from 14. Sorry, I'm deciding. Give me 2 seconds. We might save this one for the end too. Yeah, we'll bounce back to this later. Okay, yeah. So Melchizedek. After his return from the defeat of the Chedorlaomer and the kings who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him at the valley of Sheba. The valley of Sheba. Why do I keep getting bounced around here? Hold on. Okay. This location is another one that there is corroboration elsewhere in the Bible. So it's not one of these random ones. We have a section in 2 Samuel that refers to the same site. So this is one that we can probably, at least somewhat safely say, was a literal place. It was an actual geographical place because we have corroboration from likely 2 different authors, which is good. It helps. It adds confidence. That is the King's Valley. So the Valley of Sheba is also called the King's Valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was priest of God Most High, and he blessed him and said, and this gets into some weird stuff, "Blessed be Abram by God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand." I want to read you this too. So the Hebrew text, this is in reference to God Most High. This is also from Logos. The Hebrew text here uses the phrase El Elyon. This is the first biblical occurrence of the phrase, which is important. The word El is both the generic word for God in Semitic language and the name of the god El in the Canaanite pantheon. That's important to know. That adds pretty thick context outside of the Jewish text. That's really important. Elyon could refer to the Most High, deity, or mean upper or highest. In Genesis 14:22, the title is combined in the Hebrew text with the name Yahweh. So it seems that the narrator identified Yahweh with El Elyon, which is interesting because it's a tying together of two things that are not like one another. It's the use of a language that would refer to using that title, probably a different God, pulled into this one context, which is interesting. And it adds credibility at least one way, which is good. It's a good thing. And Abram gave him a tenth of everything. And the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons, but take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have lifted my hand to the Lord, God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, and I would not take a thread or a sandal strap or anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich. This to me sounds like Paul, which is a part of why I love it. I will take nothing but what the young men have eaten, and the share of the men who went with me. Let Aner and Eshcol, the Mamre, take their share. So he's saying he doesn't want it. Similar to Paul with specifically with the Corinthian church, where he refused to take money from them because he did not want to leave any room for an image to be painted of him in a manner that he did not want. That was Paul's thing with Corinth. Abram is doing a very similar thing here because he said, I don't want it because I don't want you to be able to say, I have made Abram rich. So he chooses to take nothing. He basically asked to be reimbursed for the job, is essentially what he did. Let me get what the young men have eaten and the share of the men who went with me. So let me pay my people and let's recoup our costs for the job. And that's it. Beyond that, he didn't want anything. Up here in 20, the end of 20, Abram gave him a tenth of everything. Has anybody heard a church talk about this? Has anybody heard a church say this before? Because it's a relatively common one that the church will use to justify a tithe. We've already talked so much about this, so I don't think most people are confused anymore. But this is this is not a recurring thing. Like a tithe is a recurring donation to a church. It's your consistent financial assistance for the church. It's something that is recurring. There's no reason to believe that's recurring. In fact, contextually, it would make no sense at all for it to be recurring. This is a payment. And Abram gave him a tenth of everything. This is a one-time move. A tenth payment to a king was a known thing. So when this tries to get conflated in modern times of, oh, you need to tithe because, like this is an example, it's a joke. The Malachi verse is the most common one because they can twist Malachi easier than this. This is impossible to twist, in my opinion. It is like, it's the worst example of exegesis ever. If you try to use this was a tenth payment to a king. That was a known thing. It was a very common thing. It's something we know for sure in and out of the Bible was a tenth would go to the king. So do you think the Christian church would really then be like, yes, we're going to instate a payment system that the kings instated because that's going to go over well? Like, no, of course not. But the Malachi verse is easier to play exegetical gymnastics with, which is why that's the most common one. But I have seen this. Absolutely. I've seen this. Melchizedek. So I wanted to read this too, because this was interesting. This is also from Logos. This name, which is Melchizedek in Hebrew, likely means my king is righteous or king of righteousness. It could also mean Tizedek is my king, which completely changes the way it reads into the text, which is why this is so difficult. And it's also why it aggravates me that we just decide which one and then kind of roll with it. But I get that you kind of have to. With Tizedek referring to a deity's name. So Melchizedek is only mentioned one more time in the Old Testament, and that is in Psalm, but features prominently in the New Testament book of Hebrews, which is true. The part that I just want to point out, because it's a really good example of what we talk about a lot, is like in context, we're choosing to interpret it the first way, which could very well be true, but it could also not be true. So again, the two options were the name either means my king is righteous or king of righteousness. The second option is that it's Tizedek is my king, which would be, it would read different. It would read in a different way. It's not terribly important, but this is one where the biblical interpreters, they have to sit and say, which do we think it is? Which are we going to put out into the Bible that is then sent to the masses to read? What we choose here, everybody else is just going to believe, because 99% of people do not check anything at all. It's a lot of responsibility. And I think most of the time they make a good choice, but I do not think all of the time. And it's rough that most people will just never know that there were other outcomes, other possibilities that made perfect sense in Hebrew too. It was a coin flip. And the party with the authority gets to flip the coin, and they get to decide which it is that we actually go into. Okay, so again, right here, 14, the beginning through 10, I've added to the Genesis thing in Discord because there is a lot to go through, quite a bit, just like Genesis 10. At the end, we will go through all of it. So if that's not one you want to sit and grit your teeth through, you at least just don't come that night, because it'll just be a lot of names, a lot of possible locations, a lot of we know this, we don't know this, a lot of I found this, but it conflicts with this. Just my full breakdown of all of the names from Genesis 10 and then from the first half of 14. But the Amalekites, again, I did find something else here that I wanted to read too. Because, again, reminder. So the Amalekites, what we know, probably from context, is that Esau, they were descendants of Esau, who is a descendant of Abraham. So the Amalekites, at the core, are a Canaan. They're living in Canaan, or they at least took parts of Canaan. And then from Genesis, we learn later that they come from Esau, who came from Abraham, because Esau was Abraham's grandson. I also got this, though. This was interesting. So a nomadic tribe, which we covered, associated with the Edomites from Genesis 36, who were descendants of Esau and frequent enemies of Israel. We know that too from Exodus. We know that too from Deuteronomy. The association shows that this mention of the Amalekites is anachronistic, since Amalek was Esau's grandson. The Amalekites could not have been present during the time of Abram. The name may be an editorial insertion by a later writer, which was common. However, it is possible that other people known as Amalekites lived in this region at an earlier time, which may be the point of Balaam's comment about Amalek being first among the nations, which happens in Numbers 24. So I'll break that down again. This is another one that we don't understand why this is here. When the Amalekites are mentioned here, from what we know of the lineage, it doesn't make any sense. Because Amalek was Esau's grandson. The Amalekites were descendants of Esau. Esau was the descendant of Abraham. So none of them existed yet. The Amalekites could not have been present during the time of Abram. 14 here is during the time of Abram. So when they're mentioned, they didn't exist as far as we understand. As far as what we know, greater context-wise, the Amalekites didn't exist yet. They couldn't have. Because we're in the time of Abram, not Abraham, which means Esau doesn't exist, which means the descendants of Esau, who become the Amalekites, don't exist. So, what some think at the level of scholarship, not me, is that it could have been either an editorial insertion by a later author, which happens all the time, it's one of those dirty little things in the Bible that we pretend doesn't happen, but it absolutely has. Or there could have been another group that just happened to be called the Amalekites that just happened to live in this region. And it just happened to be during this exact time with Abram. My bet is on the first one because logically it makes more sense. It's a perfectly normal thing that we know has happened in other places in the Bible. It would explain for the issue, and it's much less of a reach, in my opinion. Saying that there was another group called the Amalekites who just happened to live in that region and just happened to be there at the same time as Abram, it's a lot of hopes and dreams, I think. Whereas like saying, yeah, somebody took editorial discretion into their own hands and decided to add it to the story, which we know they did. I think it's more probable that that's the actual answer. But it's one of the ones like, we'll never know. We just know that it doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense. So you in your head have to decide. It's either, possibility A or possibility B, because it can't be as simple as it seems, because the math doesn't work out in terms of timelines. Okay, 15. Yeah, 15 we're going to have to wait on. We got through this quick. Might call it early. So, if you've not been with us, TikTok people primarily, we have a Discord. You can see it on YouTube now if you got off TikTok. The Discord is free, like I said earlier. There's a link on my profile on TikTok. There's a link in the pin chat on YouTube. There's also a link in the description of all the videos. Join, it's free, it's totally free. You can get notified when we do live streams. We do them twice a week. And wildly smart people. So if you have questions about the Bible, or you want to go obnoxiously deep into something and probably have your mind blown, because I constantly do, it's a good place to be. So I would recommend joining that. On Thursday, we are starting again with Adam and Eve, which has been really, really good. I was excited for it, but if I'm being honest, I didn't know I was going to be that excited for it. It's been so long since I read it. I had a lot more fun than I thought I would. I forgot how good it was. So Adam and Eve, again, I think we're going to wrap up early, so you guys are welcome to bail whenever. But if you're watching this later or whatever, join us on Thursday nights at 7 p.m. Central Time. And again, Discord has all that information. It's easy to get from there. Because we're doing Adam and Eve, the non-canonical text. So Adam and Eve 1 and 2, also called the conflict of Adam and Eve with Satan. These are the forgotten texts of Eden. The assumption is that they come in at the end. We are such theological nerds. I know, it's so sad. That's exactly how I felt too. It's like the minute we started reading it, I'm like, oh my God, this is so exciting. They're non-canonical texts. So in your Bible, your NIV, your ESV, your ASP, that is the canon, right? That is what Christians at large decided. These books are inspired by God. The funny thing is like there's dozens and dozens of other books that like Catholics accept, other sects of Christianity accept, and way back in the day, everybody accepted. These books were removed through history because they were said to not be canon. They were not inspired by God. Our theory is that who cares? We're going to read it all because if nothing else, it adds historical context to the Bible because these texts were around and these texts expand on stories. So you need to be careful to a point that you're not adding things to the Bible unless you believe they should have been, which is like your prerogative, But even if not, reading different texts, whether they're Mesopotamian texts or Egyptian texts, anything else from this time period, doesn't need to be canon. It doesn't need to be inspired. You read it and it adds historical context, like the number 318. We know that 318 of them in chapter 14 was probably not the literal number because of other texts, other Egyptian texts, where the number is repeated over and over and over again. It indicates that there was some sort of relevance or meaning to the number 318 during that time period, whether it was Jewish or Egyptian or Mesopotamian. It shows that there is a clear something about the number 318. We wouldn't know that if all you did was only read the Bible. It doesn't need to be inspired. Like, be a student, period. Because then you come back to the Bible and you're like, oh crap, 318. All those Egyptian texts said that. They were really focused on that number. I wonder why that number is picking up right here. It's important. So anyways, the Adam and Eve picks up where Genesis leaves off, storyline wise. And it's an entirely different extension to the story that, if you accept it as truth, it adds a lot. But even if you don't, it makes you think differently when you come back to Genesis the next time, or when you think about really anything. Like, you'll remember things, and you just have to be smart enough to be like, okay, well, I don't fully trust this apocryphal text. I don't fully trust this apocryphal text. So I'm just going to use it as interesting information and general context of historically reading the Bible. Even if that's a win. That's a total win. My kids make fun of me. LOL. Lord Help Us Tampa said, I'm going to have to watch the replay. I'm not the best at paying attention to the clock. You're good. You're good. But if you're going to come Thursday, you should watch the replay. Just put it on like 2x speed or something. But it was really good. It's really, really good. It's very different, and you can feel it right away. I had a great time. I'm a total nerd. I should try setting an alarm. Yeah, I have to set an alarm a lot of the time. On Thursday, I almost blew it and was late because my schedule has changed. So I didn't even know it was Thursday. So yeah, Sunday night at 6 p.m. Central Time. Thursday night at 7 p.m. Central Time. If you made alarms for those, you'd be good. 6 p.m. Sunday Central Time. Thursday Central, 7. And then we're good. TikTok, I'm going to close you out. Have a lovely evening. All the TikTok peeps. There were a lot of people over there today. A lot of TikTok people over there, man. Doing TikTok stuff. I feel like there was something else, but maybe not. I set an alarm and I'm still always late. That's so sad. Some people are just late. I've learned that in life. Some people are just always late. It's just something about them. I don't know what it is. I'm always early. I have a huge personal issue with myself if I'm late to something. It hurts my pride, probably, I guess, if I'm being honest with what it is. It hurts my pride to be late. I'm always like 20 minutes early and sitting in the car, just because I can't bear to be late for something. But I have other problems, so I got to do something like that, right? To make up for my other problems. Always late, even online church. It's kind of impressive. To always be late all the time is kind of impressive. When I was at my last job, everybody was always late. Always. You could count on it. If somebody was on time, it was a peculiar event. I think it's just some people. I don't know. It's an interesting time right now. That's really all there is. All right. Well, yeah, I mean, we're going to call it early. So we will come back. We will come back to chapter 14. I did put it in the Genesis discussion on Discord. So I've added some things that you guys have thrown out since we've been going. Genesis 10 was the descendants from Noah. We'll do the full hot and heavy dive into every name that's on there. And then the same will be true for 1 through 10 in chapter 14, because it's the same type of situation. But it's just like, it's gruesome work going through all of them. And it really disrupts like reading the story. So I don't want to do it in the middle of the story. I lied to myself on my doctor's appointments to put the time half hour earlier so I'm not late. Some people have to do that. It's just like, it's a habit that like you should figure out. But until you do, I think it's a great idea to tell yourself that it starts earlier than it actually does. Yeah. I mean, there's like an old, I guess guys joke that like you tell your wife you have to be there an hour before you actually have to be there, because then you'll be on time. And I think it's in reference to like women getting ready with makeup and all that jazz. So that's like a very long old joke that I've always heard, at least. It's like, tell your wife it starts at 6 if it actually starts at 7. and you might be there by 7, or you might only be 10 minutes late or whatever. I've known a lot of ladies who've been on time though. I think it's more a stereotype than anything else. But stereotypes come from somewhere, you know? They've got truth in them somewhere. Beautiful. All right. I'm out. Thursday, Adam and Eve should be really good. It will be part 2. I don't know how many parts there will be, but we're just going to read as much as we can every Thursday, and that will be a new part, just weekly parts. And then after Genesis is done, we'll come back to this. So again, if you guys are reading anything on your own from Genesis, and there's anything you want us to go into specifically, just throw it all in here, and then we'll hit all that stuff at the end. I started doing it when I learned to read. Did you pray like by writing? I did that for a long time. I had a hard time like praying in my head or praying out loud. So one of, if not the first way that like I learned how to pray was to write. I like wrote letters basically. And that was easier for me. Oh, you said read. I misread that. So never mind. But now you know, that's something I did. That's something I did. Because I felt very silly doing it in my head. And I felt even sillier doing it out loud. But for some reason, writing didn't feel as silly. So I would just write. And that would be how I prayed. And I still do that, kind of, sometimes, in a sense. It's helpful. It's helpful for me. Pastor is so sweet, man. Pastor is so sweet. All right, guys, I'm out. Have a lovely night, and I will see you Thursday for the Adam and Eve, which I'm super stoked about because it's been real good. It's been real good. Wait, we used to pray on these things weekly. How come we don't do that anymore? That's a good question. So I think, because I've thought about this before, like over the past handful of months, I think the reason we stopped is because the prayer thing on Discord got messed up, and then Sarah left, and then a bunch of other stuff happened. And I think it just got pushed to the side, honestly, because we kind of had a decent thing where like people could submit the prayers, and I had them in like my little section thing or whatever. But I think Sarah leaving was a big part of why that kind of came to a screeching halt. But I'd like to get it fixed. I was looking at different ways of doing it, and I think honestly, just because we're still so small, I think unless it got crazy, I could just sit 10-15 minutes before and try to pull whatever was since the last stream. I guess it's like 3 days. It can't get that crazy. Maybe we do it again. You're right. You're right. Maybe we do it again. I'll post something, but I think what we'll do, can you guys see this? Yeah. I think what we'll do is in the public prayer section, like for today, I would pull anything from Friday, Saturday, or today, and I could read those, and then like I'll pray. And then for Thursday, it would be anything from Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then Thursday until the stream. That shouldn't be hard. Like if we had a bunch more people and a bunch of messages in here, then that would be hard. I should be able to do that. I should be able to do that. I don't think there's an excuse not to do that. So let's do that because that's a great idea. And that's bothered me. And I've been very insecure about how to deal with it because Sarah had a good system and then the system just got completely broken. So the public prayer section, I'm going to read, but then I have to like get people's permission. I don't know. Let me think about it. Maybe, well, no, it's public prayer. It's public prayer. The prayer chat, maybe I'll make this called private prayer. And then this will be, the public prayer will be public. So if you choose to post in public, you're giving me permission to read it. And if you do it in the prayer chat, then you're good. I don't know. I'll figure this out. I'll either add another one for stream prayer or something, or I'll make a private prayer section so people know like that's a place where I'm not going to say it out loud on the internet. Or can Pastora pray, or is she not wanting to talk in the live stream? We haven't had the pleasure of having her on the voice channel. No, I would be more than happy to let her do the prayer for sure. That would be beautiful. I wouldn't mind that at all. Shoot, and we forgot to turn the voice channel on. And by we, I mean me, but nobody yelled at me. I need you guys to help me remember. We need to make it a habit again. The voice channel just needs to be open when we do this. So if you come in and you see it's not open, just yell at me. I'd like that to be like standard operating procedure. So 2 things to fix. We need to make sure we do the live voice during the Bible studies. You just got to get in the habit. And then I will fix the prayer section. And I'll make it obvious. I think public prayer will be something I can read out loud. So these ones from Pastora would be good to go. And I'll make a private prayer section there too. So you know there's somewhere safe. I'll do that right now before I get off my desk. So there will be the public prayer is free game. So don't put anything in there starting today that you don't mind that I read out loud on stream. There will also be a private prayer section right here too. That would be a safe place where I will post none of that. So you know it will not go public. I'm going to do all that right now. But if you don't know, Pastora puts stuff in here pretty regularly, and it's pretty phenomenal. A lot of it is, it's not only like, how do you describe it? It's very collective, I guess I'd say. It's really, really good. And there's a lot of good quotes, a lot of things pulled from scripture. It's really good. If you haven't gone through it, it's very good. If you need like a bright 5 minutes into your life real quick, it's a solid place to go for that. All right, we're going to make a private prayer section right now, so that'll be there. And then we should be good to go. My English pronunciation is no good. It's easier to read. I totally get it. You guys hear me try to pronounce some things out of the Bible because I learned everything through text. Like very little of my education was listening to stuff. So a lot of the pronunciations are just god awful because I never had to. I read it and then I wrote it. I never had to speak it. I never had to say it. It's been one of the very obnoxious things about the way that I learned all this stuff. But I'm sure it's funny to watch, so I guess that's good. The private prayer channel will be here in like 2 seconds, just so y'all know. But anything you put in there will be totally safe. I won't read it out loud. But anything starting today in the public prayer, and I'll make like an announcement too, but that will all be fair game. So just be careful. But this will be good to go right now. Boom. All right. Cool. Well, problem solved. Thanks, Rodriguez, because we needed that. That was really good. We were in good habit with that for a long time. We got to fix that. Cool. All right. Yeah, it's good to go. I made a forgiveness rosary with 7 mystery to repeat sentences. 70 times 7. Interesting. Did you make the rosary? Like, did you bead yourself? I made a rosary when I was a kid in Catholic school. We got commissioned to, we were basically used as slave labor to make rosaries for the church. I mean, it's good labor for kids. It's good kid labor. We beaded, what do you call it? Beading, stringing beads. Is that how you say that? We beaded string. Maybe that's how you say it. Either way, I made a rosary. That's a fun fact. I bet Pastora's rosary looks a hell of a lot better than mine did because it was pretty atrocious. The spacing was all wrong. I had no sense of spatial awareness when I was a young child. Not until later. Not until later. All right, we're out, guys. I'm gonna make an announcement about the prayer section, and then so same thing though. I hope you're there Thursday, Rodriguez. I need you guys to remind me of 1, to turn on the voice channel every time we stream, and 2, to close with prayer, because I'm going to really try to remember, but it's likely I'm going to get super into what we're reading, and I'm not going to think about it again. So if you guys could hold me accountable, I would appreciate that. I very much need that. Ghosts know this rosary. He made the translation. Oh, that's cool. I'll ask Ghost about it. He's busy on a yacht this evening, so that's why he couldn't join us. But next time I talk to him, I'll ask him about it. All right, yeah, please, Rodriguez, be the person that holds me accountable. Prayer at the end and voice channel on the whole time. And I need to get in the habit. So just start lighting me up if they're both not done, because that would be way better. Be way better. Both things, very good things. All right, I'm out. I'm going to make an announcement about the prayer section. So now public will be public, and private I will never read out loud. So that is safe. Same with prayer chat. Safe. Public prayer, not safe. Very public. Very public. I mean, not really. There's like 8 people, but public enough. All right, guys, have a good night. I love you guys. See you Thursday for Adam and Eve, which I'm super stoked about. Super stoked about it.